Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. It begins not with a scream but with silence, the kind of silence that hangs heavy in the air like the moment before a cathedral bell tolls. In the year of our Emperor M35.091, one of the most powerful individuals in the Imperium of Man, Chancellor Maverick Rowe of the High Lords of Terra, vanished. No proclamation, no body, no trace. The Administratum redacted entire records. The ecclesiarchy invoked blasphemous silence. Even the Custodes, golden and stoic, said nothing. And it was in that dreadful nothingness that the whispers began. They speak of a temple beneath the imperial palace, buried in strata untouched since the age of strife. Not a temple of worship to the emperor, but one to something far more decadent, something beautiful and terrible, a cult of pleasure, pain, and perversion. They say its halls are lined in marble that breathes, its altars slick with tears of ecstasy and agony, and perhaps deep within lies the final echo of Maverick Rowe's voice, screaming, singing, or both. Welcome to a forgotten chapter of horror, heresy, and hedonism buried in the bones of Terra itself. The High Lords of Terra rule from a throne of shadows. Officially, they are the stewards of the Emperor's will, managing the impossible logistics of an empire spanning a million worlds. But unofficially, between the cold marble walls and behind the gold-plated masks, they are players in a game of secrets older than the Imperium itself. They hold the power of extinction in a signature and the means to erase truth from history. And in this web of lies and legislation, the disappearance of one of their own is less a scandal and more a symptom of something festering. To understand the magnitude of what happened to Maverick Rowe, we must understand the culture of concealment among the High Lords. These are not men and women who cling to power with desperation. They are born into it, forged by it, consumed by it. Each is a master of their domain, be it the Administratum, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, or the Fabricator General of Mars, and all of them understand that visibility is vulnerability. Every secret is a shield, every omission a weapon. Within this sanctum, knowledge is hoarded like treasure and deployed like a scalpel. The High Lords operate on layers. What the Imperium knows of their actions is but the outermost skin, a carefully manicured facade. Beneath that are decisions too controversial for public ears. Planetary sterilizations, faith schisms, containment of unsanctioned Xenos knowledge. And deeper still are the acts so blasphemous, so dangerous, that even their own peers dare not name them. This is where Rowe's disappearance resides, in that blackened stratum of unspeakable governance. Maverick Rowe was not just any High Lord. As Chancellor of the Imperial Council, he held the power to convene and dissolve meetings, to shape agendas, to drown investigations in bureaucracy. He was the eye of the storm, the voice that quieted dissent, the hand that signed inquisitorial purges under the veil of administrative necessity. To lose a figure like that, without announcement, without a power vacuum, indicates complicity at the highest levels. It was not a removal, it was an erasure, and there lies the real horror. If a High Lord can be unmade so cleanly, then it was not the act of enemies. It was family turning on its own. The other 11, at least some of them, knew, or worse, they sanctioned it. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica may have scrubbed his psychic presence. The Officio Assassinorum may have delivered the final blow. And the Inquisition, ever the blade in the dark, may have orchestrated the entire play under the guise of preserving stability. But why? That is the eternal question. His policies, while firm, were not extreme. His demeanor, while authoritative, was not erratic. He maintained a spotless record, a portfolio of loyalty. If heresy took root in him, it was a corruption deeper than ambition. It was a seduction. And nothing seduces the powerful like Slaanesh, the Lord of Excess, the Prince of Pleasure, the whisper in the heart. The notion that even within the High Lord's ranks, the temptations of chaos could slither unnoticed is not merely a scandal. It is a revelation of imperial vulnerability. What if Rowe wasn't targeted for heresy, but for what he knew? What if he stumbled upon a hidden truth too dangerous to let live? A temple beneath Terra, perhaps? Or a network of indulgence funded by noble houses, feeding cults under the mask of decadence? Or, more terrifying still, what if he was not a victim at all, but a patron? Within the Senatum Imperialis, each High Lord's quarters are sacred ground, immune to all but the Emperor's will. If a ritual took place, if a cult gathered behind closed doors, it could remain invisible even to the Inquisition. Perhaps Ro was not taken, but transformed, shed his human skin in a final act of apotheosis, devoured by the very god he worshipped in secret. Maybe the temple beneath Terra was not found, but revealed. And maybe his fellow lords turned a blind eye, not out of fear, but fascination. In the end, Ro's disappearance reflects not a moment of weakness, but a systemic rot. The High Lords are meant to be untouchable, but in truth, they are merely men and women, frail against the seductions of eternity. And if even they can fall, quietly, completely, then what hope has the rest of the Imperium? Beneath the Imperial Palace lies a world forgotten by time and unlit by faith. It is not a place built with intention, but one grown layer by layer over millennia, an accretion of architectures, buried ages, and the detritus of empire. These are not simple basements or service tunnels. They are caverns as large as cities, ossified mechanisms the Mechanicus no longer understands, and crypts whose names were never recorded. To say that the understructure of Terra is vast is to insult the word vast. It is infinite in the way madness is infinite. These catacombs defy cartography. They span beneath the Imperial Palace in impossible directions, spreading like roots into the bedrock of the throne world. Most citizens of Terra, even those of high rank, believe the palace ends at its deepest vaults, the fortified sanctums of the Adeptus Custodes or the black cells of the Inquisition. But those are mere mezzanines. Below them lies the hollow, what few archivists whisper of as the foundation of foundations, a place so ancient it predates the coming of the Emperor. During the Unification Wars, the Emperor's armies fought techno-barbarian warlords not only in the spires of Terra but in these very depths. Some legends speak of feral data spirits, AI constructs driven mad by millennia of solitude. Others tell of shrines to dead gods, their faces carved in stone older than Mars. And while the surface was brought to heel and layered over with imperial glory, these subrealms were left largely untouched, sealed, denied, forgotten, but never empty. The truth is that the labyrinth beneath the palace is a perfect breeding ground for rot, not just physical decay, but spiritual blight. In the darkness, strange energies fester. Warp echoes, corrupted relics, and failed experiments lie dormant, waiting for a breath of belief to awaken them. And it is in these halls that the impossible becomes feasible. The construction of a temple to a dark god in the very heart of the Imperium. Imagine the process. A hidden path, discovered not by accident, but by invitation. A shaft sealed with hexagrammatic wards that have since grown brittle. Descended not by torchlight, but by sacred procession. Perhaps it was a rogue cartographia engineer who mapped the voids, or a gene-coded lineage of tech clerics who kept the secrets alive, passing them down in whispers and blood rites. The deeper they dug, the more the walls began to sing, stone echoing with promises, the warp bleeding into reality. The temple would not have been built all at once. It would have grown like a tumor, a chamber here, converted from an old data vault, a corridor there, carved from collapsed manufactorum waste channels. Over decades, centuries perhaps, rooms became sanctums, sanctums became shrines, and shrines became a cathedral of sin. Stone melted into flesh, banners of silken paradox unfurled, and the air itself pulsed with breathless desire. And no one saw it. Or if they did, they said nothing. The Adeptus Mechanicus guards its secrets with zealous paranoia, and what lies beneath the palace is sacred even to them. The Custodes do not descend without cause, and when they do, their reports vanish into the black archives. It is entirely possible, probable even, that some among the Terran elite knew of this place and used it, not out of loyalty to Slaanesh, but out of desperation, curiosity, or addiction. Power is a lonely throne, and pleasure a seductive escape. The temple beneath Terra could exist precisely because the Imperium is too vast, too rigid, and too blind to see what festers in its heart. Bureaucracy becomes armor. Dogma becomes a shroud. And in the interstices of those blind spots, heresy blooms like orchids in the dark. Perhaps the temple is sentient. Perhaps it shifts when approached. Or perhaps it lies there still, unmoving, unbreathing, waiting for the next High Lord to follow the footsteps of Ro and listen to the whispers in the stone. In the deepest dark beneath the palace, truth is not what you find, it's what finds you. The 35th millennium was a twilight age for the Imperium. It lacked the desperate valor of the Great Crusade and the apocalyptic fervor of the Horus heresy. Instead, it festered in a rot that did not scream, but whispered. The Imperium had not collapsed, but it had calcified. Its institutions grew decadent, its leaders grew complacent, and in that torpor, something old and beautiful and terrible reawakened: the cults of Slaanesh. Unlike the brutish savagery of Khorne or the hideous corruption of Nurgle, Slaanesh infiltrates with elegance. Its arrival is not heralded by plague or fire, but by song, by touch, by the subtle redefinition of beauty. In M35, the highborn of Terra and other core worlds began to seek escape from the crushing monotony of endless ceremony and bureaucratic inertia. They began to indulge, not in treason but in art, in philosophy, in sensation. At first it was harmless. Poetry competitions that blurred into dreamlike orgies of sound and light. Performances so immersive they left the audience weeping, vomiting, changed. Drugs formulated by the hidden alchemists of the Underhive that didn't dull pain, but refined it into exquisite agony. They called it ecstatic transcendence. They called it a return to the authentic soul. But it was corruption, refined and wrapped in the silk of culture. This was a time when the ecclesiarchy was focused outward, crusading against heresies on distant worlds, letting Terra's inner rot spread. The Inquisition, distracted by wars against psychic outbreaks, missed the signs. And the High Lords, those that did not partake, at least tolerated the growing strangeness among the upper classes. Some called it an artistic renaissance. Others knew better, but dared not act. Slaanesh does not storm the gates. It opens them from within, with a kiss and a whisper. The cults were not overtly religious. That was their genius. They presented themselves as salons, as aesthete circles, as philosophical societies. Their gatherings were invitation only, and those who were invited never spoke of what they saw. Some returned more beautiful. Some returned hollowed out. Some did not return at all. And still the invitations continued, sealed with symbols that did not match any known noble house but seemed familiar, organic, almost alive. By mid-M35, these cults had spread into the imperial bureaucracy. Scribes who copied ancient texts began slipping in phrases not written by human hands. Administrators who handled birth registries started replacing names with Moan symbols or colors. A census in Hive Helios reported 30% of the noble population as missing, though no one investigated. Why would they? The missing had been elevated, they said, transformed. It was in this climate of subtle collapse that the temple beneath Terra might have blossomed. Its construction, as previously imagined, was likely nurtured by these surface cults. Donations funneled through shell institutions. Labor provided by Underhive slaves modified for silence. The architecture itself a mirror of the god it honored, ever-shifting, impossible to fully map, beautiful to behold, and unbearable to remember. The cults did not preach. They performed. A sermon might consist of a man's soul being peeled through sound, or a woman's memories rewritten in a ballet of knives and silk. There were no prayers, only hymns, no doctrines, only sensations. Each ritual was unique, ephemeral, and perfect in its execution, and at the center always was the promise of becoming more, of shedding the chains of this gray reality and entering into communion with the divine orgasm of Slaanesh. The horror was not in their excess. It was in their joy. These cultists did not cry out in pain, they sang. They did not lament their lost humanity, they celebrated its transcendence. And when the occasional purge did come, when an inquisitor stumbled too close or a noble's madness leaked into the open, the cult dissolved like perfume in air, leaving nothing but a lingering scent and a series of suicides among the purgers. So when Chancellor Rowe began to withdraw from public life, when he began commissioning art pieces of unnameable form and attending events no one could recall afterward, it wasn't seen as strange. It was fashionable. It was modern. It was what Terra had become in M35, a world where sensation was God, and the god behind the sensation was laughing. Chancellor Maverick Rowe's disappearance was not an event. It was an absence that deepened with every passing hour, like a spreading shadow that swallowed facts, timelines, and reason itself. It began with silence. No announcement, no formal declaration of his stepping down. Then came the absences from council sessions, justified by vague reports of illness, spiritual retreat, or undisclosed duties. By the time anyone asked questions out loud, the mechanisms of obfuscation were already grinding to erase the man from memory. Maverick Row had been a pillar of the High Lords for over 2 centuries. Not the most flamboyant, not the most feared, but constant. He was the weight that kept the scale balanced, the bureaucrat's bureaucrat. Trained within the depths of the administratum, he rose through 100 levels of obscurity before finally being elevated to Chancellor, a position that, though devoid of the martial glory of the Lord Commander Militant or the psychic spectacle of the Paternal Envoy, was central to the function of the Council. Without Rowe, there were no agendas, no votes, no cohesion. His last known appearance was recorded during a closed session dealing with Hive Helios' degenerative collapse. Witnesses recall that he was subdued, distant. Some say he kept his eyes closed through the entire meeting. Others mention his voice, once iron and clipped, now soft, musical, too slow to follow. That same day, an entire wing of the Grand Archive was sealed by decree of the Officio Perfectus, citing seismic instability. The archivists within were never seen again. In the weeks that followed, aides assigned to Rowe's offices were reassigned without explanation. His quarters in the Spire of Accord were repurposed overnight. Servitors bearing his seal were found wandering, blank-faced, their data cores wiped clean. When inquiries were made, responses came layered in denial and contradiction. He was in retreat, he was reassigned, he was never a chancellor to begin with. The Inquisition remained officially silent, but rumors tell of a team dispatched by the Ordo Hereticus vanishing beneath the palace. Their last transmission spoke of voices in the stone, and a light that moved against time. Some say a reclusiarch of the ecclesiarchy declared Rowe a saint posthumously before being silenced and sent to a penal shrine world. Others whisper that an inquisitorial rosette was found embedded in a slab of polished obsidian beneath the spire, warped, melted, fused with human teeth. And then there are the reports that no one officially acknowledges, tales from sanitation crews tasked with cleansing sublevel ducts near the Senatum. One such team claimed to find a hidden shaft that wasn't there the day before, spiraling downward and lined with what looked like velvet skin. Another reported music, delicate harp strains with no source, yet each note felt like it plucked nerves directly from their spines. When a tech adept tried to log the phenomena, his data slate exploded into ash and his eyes bled roses. The Adeptus Custodes, silent watchers of the palace, made no public move. But their patrol patterns shifted subtly. Entire areas became off-limits, even to other branches of imperial authority. A few weeks later, those same areas were seen being reinforced with materials bearing Martian origin marks. Materials designed to contain warp anomalies, not intrusions. One Custodes was seen returning from one of these zones, his armor stained with a fluid that shimmered like oil and bled like flesh. He refused debriefing. He was never seen again. What truly happened to Rowe is unknowable. Some believe he was a martyr, sacrificed to contain a growing cult before it reached the rest of the High Lords. Others say he was an apostate, consumed by beauty, broken by sensation, and reborn as something unfit for the light of day. The most disturbing theory, though, is the quietest, that he was neither victim nor villain, but vessel. That through him, Slaanesh found a voice within the palace walls. That through his disappearance, the god of excess marked Terra itself. His name is still scrubbed from most records, but if one listens carefully in the black halls beneath the Senatum, some say you can hear a whisper. Not a scream, not a moan, a whisper of silk against stone, of laughter behind glass, of a voice humming a tune too perfect for any human throat. Rowe is gone, but his final note still echoes in the deep. No heresy begins as blasphemy. It begins with longing. The longing for meaning, for sensation, for escape. And in the case of the temple beneath Terra, that longing was given shape, carved in stone, stitched in silk, breathed into life through rites older than language. Though no records exist to confirm its creation, and no inquisitorial report dares to name it, the whispers that surround its origin are too consistent to ignore. This was not a cult that infested the substructure. This was a temple that grew, born from a desire shared by too many with power and no joy. Consider how it might have started. A hidden chamber uncovered during the excavation of a forgotten vault. A fresco on the wall, half erased, half alive, depicting scenes of exquisite torment and divine union. A scent lingering in the air, floral and metallic, triggering memories of dreams never had. The adept who first entered it vanishes within a week. Those who follow begin to gather, not out of fear, but compulsion. Or perhaps it was older still, predating the Imperium, hidden during the Unification Wars, sealed by the Emperor himself, or by those who feared even he could not destroy it. A pre-imperial relic from the Age of Strife, when warp cults flourished in the darkness and Terra itself was fractured between techno-barbarian gods and psychic warlords. It might have been forgotten in name, but not in purpose. All it needed was a key. A soul broken just right. A High Lord who felt too much. Who built it? Not mere humans, not entirely. The craftsmanship described in Survivor Hallucinations is beyond anything the Mechanicus acknowledges. Marble that breathes, glass that reflects your fears instead of your face, a layout that shifts unless you walk it blindfolded. The walls are alive with vibrations, some liken it to a heartbeat, others to the rhythm of desire. There are no windows, yet light seeps in, soft, golden, impossible. The temple was not constructed in haste. It took centuries, fed by slow corruption. Rooms added in secret beneath the floor plans of already forbidden places. Laborers who never returned home. Administratum contracts rewritten mid-print to include impossible coordinates. Supply chains obscured by holy writs that no one dared audit. By the time the Inquisition stumbled upon its outermost echoes, the heart of the temple was already beating. Its central sanctum, by all fragmented accounts, is shaped like a tear, enormous, cathedral-high and acoustically perfect. At its center, an altar not of stone or metal, but of fused flesh, beautiful, terrible, singing when touched. The walls are lined with mirrors that do not reflect the viewer but their desires, and the air, it intoxicates. Witnesses, few and broken, describe inhaling memories they never lived, orgasms that transcended biology, and voices whispering in every known language and several unknown ones. The rituals performed within are not orgies in the crude sense, though pleasure is ever present. They are symphonies of experience, orchestrated with flesh, thought, and will. One ceremony involves a single note held by a choir of pain-tuned throats for 3 days straight. Another includes a dance choreographed to the heartbeat of a captive saint. Participants rarely leave the same. Some do not leave at all, consumed, sublimated, or transformed. But what keeps the temple hidden is not just secrecy, it is desire. Every person who finds it does so because part of them seeks it, even if they don't know it. That is the core of Slaanesh's genius. The god does not demand sacrifice. It offers fulfillment. And those who enter the temple are not lured. They arrive willingly, as if finally coming home. So how did it avoid detection beneath the most sacred site in the Imperium? Perhaps the Emperor allows it. Perhaps the warp cloaks it. Or perhaps the temple exists slightly out of phase with reality, a structure only accessible to those whose minds have been tuned to its frequency through excess, trauma, or revelation. What is certain is that no record of its destruction exists. Because how do you destroy something that changes when watched, that becomes you when touched? The temple beneath Terra was not built. It was summoned over centuries of desire, sin, and silence. It is not a place, it is an invitation. And somewhere in its depths, the echo of Ro's final breath still lingers, half a scream, half a sigh, wholly divine. There is no blasphemy more exquisite than the perversion of faith into sensation. The cult that thrives, or once thrived, beneath the throne world was not composed of heretics who spat upon the name of the Emperor. No, that would have been too simple, too crude. They began, as all Slaaneshi cults do, in reverence. Reverence twisted through pain into pleasure, through beauty into obsession. They did not renounce the Emperor. They sought to feel him more completely. And it was through that hunger for divine ecstasy that they found the Prince of Excess waiting. The rites practiced within the temple beneath Terra were not improvised orgies of madness, but meticulously structured symphonies of spiritual inversion. They were ceremonies designed to break the boundary between worship and pleasure, between flesh and soul. Participants did not merely offer themselves, they became instruments. Their skin, their breath, their screams and moans were tuned to create a harmony that echoed through the warp, drawing the attention of something far older than the Imperium. One such rite, according to the fractured ravings of a recovered astropath, was known only as the breath of the veil. Performed in a chamber carved to resemble the inside of a lung, It required 100 participants to breathe in precise synchrony while inhaling a pollen-like incense derived from alchemically treated myrrh and blood. As the ritual progressed, breath itself became song, and those present claimed to hear the laughter of angels or the screams of a dying god. None survived with their sanity intact, and their remains were later retrieved as part of an inquisitorial sweep, though no official record survives. Another ceremony, whispered of in forbidden lore, was called the Descent of Mirrors. Initiates would strip themselves of all identity, names, memories, even scars, before entering a hall lined with reflective panels that distorted their features. They would walk the hall in silence until they encountered their perfect reflection. Not as they were, but as they wished to be. Upon finding it, they would be allowed to merge. A process not fully understood, but often leaving the initiate either dead or changed beyond recognition. Some re-emerged with bodies reformed into living art, sculpted by unseen hands. Others were nothing but laughter and skin. But it was not just the physical rituals that defined this cult. Their theology was a masterpiece of spiritual corruption. They believed in the pulse, a divine rhythm said to lie beneath all reality, obscured by the stagnation of Imperium dogma. They viewed Slaanesh not as a god of lust and vanity, but as the purest expression of the soul's yearning to return to that original pulse. To them, suffering was refinement, beauty was truth, and pleasure was not indulgence, but revelation. Their scriptures were written not in ink, but in sensation, etched into living parchment, encoded into patterns of touch and sound. Some texts could only be read while being flayed in a specific sequence. Others required specific chemical states of the brain to comprehend. One infamous tome, the Gospel of Thorns, was bound in a language that induced euphoria upon comprehension, making it impossible to resist rereading. Every member of the cult who studied it eventually died with a smile carved into their face, some by their own hand, others by those who wanted to share the feeling. And through it all, the figure of Ro remains an enigma. Some cultists believed him to be the first mouth, the one who gave breath to the temple's song. Others whispered he was the absent face, the one who sacrificed his identity entirely to become the vessel of the god. It is even said that during the grand rite of the Moaning Prism, a festival held once every imperial decade, the temple's inner sanctum resonated with a voice none could place but all recognized. A voice that called itself Ro, though the word no longer meant anything human. The cult did not operate in isolation. Its tendrils reached into art houses, into theater troupes that never performed the same play twice, into noble salons where sensation was distilled into drink. It seduced not through power, but through the promise of escape from power, from duty, from shame, from the crushing weight of being part of the Imperium. And when its members vanished from their previous lives, no one investigated. After all, who would search for those who were always meant to be forgotten? In the temple, they were not forgotten. They became song, they became scent, they became the breath of Slaanesh beneath the bones of Terra. And in that breath, they found eternity. The Adeptus Custodes are not just guardians of the Emperor's physical form, they are watchers of Terra's every breath, its every shudder. Their golden armor is not just for war, it is a symbol of absolute vigilance. For them to ignore a cult beneath the imperial palace would be unthinkable. And yet, what happens when the enemy is not a horde at the gate, but a whisper in the walls? What if the foe wears no armor, bears no arms, but instead arrives as a lover, a song, a memory you never had? Some say the Custodes knew, not immediately, not fully, but they sensed something wrong in the deep places. Their patrols began shifting in the lower substrata of the palace. Missions were dispatched in silence, without the knowledge of the other High Lords. Custodians returned changed, not wounded, not insane, but quiet, withdrawn, as though they had seen something that made all previous definitions of battle irrelevant. There are logs, fragmented and sealed, that reference anomalous resonance events near vaults that no longer appear on any cogitator. The Silent War was not an open purge. It was a hunt without maps, a battle against something that refused to be defined. Custodes do not fear death, but they do fear ignorance. And this cult, this temple, was a void into which knowledge fell and never returned. Strike teams dispatched into the depths sometimes returned with fewer numbers than were sent. Other times they returned whole, but every member required memory purgation. The most ominous cases were those who came back, smiling. One custodian, whose name was erased from all records, was found outside the vaults of Morpheus, where psychic noise is normally drowned by anti-warp interference. He was naked, without armor or weapon, and weeping tears of gold. He spoke a single word, harmony, before dying. His gene seed was never recovered. The vault was sealed, and his armor was never displayed in the Hall of Remembrance. The Custodes are trained not only in martial discipline, but in absolute self-awareness. Their mental fortresses are legendarily unbreachable. And yet Slaanesh is not like the other ruinous powers. Slaanesh does not break through walls, it seduces them into opening. The Emperor's bodyguards, for all their might, were not immune to the beauty of perfect sensation, the longing to feel something beyond duty. This was not a war of attrition. It was a war of suggestion, of temptation, and it cost them dearly. Their silence is the greatest proof of the temple's existence. The Adeptus Custodes do not act with subtlety unless subtlety is the only option. They could not openly purge the temple, for doing so would acknowledge that such a horror had festered beneath the Golden Throne. The implications would shake the Imperium to its core. That heresy could grow in the very marrow of Terra is an idea more dangerous than any cult. And so, they fought in secret. Rooms were collapsed, pathways were flooded with blessed promethium. Wards were etched into stone, not with purity seals, but with blades that cut reality itself. They used forgotten weapons, echo grenades, null ether cages, living armor that screamed when touched by warp presence. They didn't just kill cultists, they erased them from time, from memory. But even then, victory was uncertain. The temple was not a fortress to be stormed. It was a song to be resisted, a perfume that clung to the soul. Some battles, they say, were fought inside dreams. Custodians would wake screaming from visions of themselves dancing in halls of glass and bone, their golden armor melting into silk, their voices raised not in battle cry but in chorus. After the final purge operation, if it was final, entire sublevels were sealed behind logic paradoxes. No maps lead to them. No doors open. The stone itself denies their presence, and yet the air still hums. Machines placed in those areas report slight temperature variations, random bursts of pheromonal activity, sudden shifts in acoustics. Nothing definitive. Nothing you could prove. But something. Why the Custodes never spoke of it, why no records were made public, is simple. They protect the Emperor's realm not just from invasion, but from despair. If the people knew that Slaanesh had once danced beneath the Golden Throne, that ecstasy had sung within earshot of the Master of Mankind, the psychic backlash could ripple across the Imperium like a scream. And maybe, just maybe, it was not a complete victory. Maybe part of the temple remains, not in stone, but in those who remember it in dreams. In Custodes who linger a moment too long near the sealed vaults. In the Golden Warrior who hums when no one is listening. The silent war was fought not just to kill, but to contain, to forget, to forgive, and to prevent the sweetest sin from ever being named again. There's a reason not everything is destroyed in the Imperium. Sometimes annihilation is not possible. Sometimes it is not even desirable. The temple beneath Terra, despite the enormity of its blasphemy, despite the violation it represents at the heart of the Imperium, was never truly obliterated. Eradication was not the path chosen, if indeed it was ever on the table at all. And the reasons for that are as chilling as the temple itself. One explanation, perhaps the most palatable, is pragmatic restraint. To destroy something is to expose it, to make its existence undeniable. The Imperium survives not on truth, but on control. To declare that a temple of Slaanesh had existed beneath the very feet of the Emperor would be to admit failure on a scale so vast it might shake the faith of entire sectors. Worlds might burn not from rebellion, but from despair. That kind of psychic weight is dangerous, even lethal in a galaxy where belief shapes reality. Another, darker possibility lies in the politics of power. The High Lords of Terra are not monolithic. They are a council of competing interests, rival agencies, and ancient vendettas wrapped in gold leaf. What if the temple's continued existence served a function? A threat, a secret blade? If a few among the High Lords knew of it, knew where it lay, what it could do, or how it changed people, then it could be used. As leverage, as blackmail, as insurance. No greater deterrent exists than knowing your soul could be whispered into madness beneath your own palace. There's even the notion that some simply wanted it preserved. That within the vast and faceless bureaucracies of Terra, there are those who believe the temple held value, not just as a monument to heresy, but as a source of knowledge. The warp is a tide, after all, and Slaanesh one of its most seductive waves. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus perhaps might argue for containment over destruction. The Adeptus Mechanicus might covet its structure, its materials, its non-Euclidean geometry. Forbidden knowledge is still knowledge, and for some, that outweighs purity. But the most disturbing theory, the one that keeps even custodians in waking meditation for days, is that the temple cannot be destroyed. Not because of its physical defenses, but because it is alive. Not metaphorically, literally. A temple with no architect but a will. A place that grows not through stone and labor, but through belief and desire. An entity that shifts location, that wraps itself around the thoughts of those who seek it. Kill the cultists, burn the altars, collapse the passages, yet somehow, somewhere, the temple remains. There are reports, unverified and deeply classified, of personnel vanishing near areas that had supposedly been cleansed, of servitors returning from cleansing missions with altered programming, worshipful, poetic, useless. One instance described a cleaning drone inscribing looping glyphs of ecstatic praise on the walls in oil and blood before exploding in a cloud of violet mist. Another tale speaks of a junior psyker whose dreams grew increasingly erotic and terrifying, culminating in a vision of a masked woman singing a single note that broke glass 3 floors above her chamber. She died the next morning, smiling. Even more enigmatic is the theory that the Emperor himself has not allowed the temple to be destroyed. Perhaps, in his incomprehensible state, he sees a utility in it. Or perhaps it was part of some grander plan, now forgotten. After all, the Emperor walked Terra when it was a broken thing, full of horror and mutation. Could he have sealed something within those depths not out of error, but intention? Could this temple be a valve, a release, a pressure point? But the spiritual anguish of a decaying species. There is something deeply ironic and perhaps intended in that possibility. That the God Emperor, the beacon of mankind, may have sanctioned a sliver of darkness beneath his very throne. Not to worship, but to balance. To absorb the sin that cannot be erased, only redirected. What better place to hide excess than beneath the edifice of eternal discipline? So it is not destroyed, not truly, not completely. At best, it sleeps. At worst, it waits. For another row, for another voice to echo through its halls, for the memory of sensation to rise again in those who walk the gleaming floors of the palace above. The temple is not gone. It is merely beneath. The question of Chancellor Maverick Ro's allegiance remains unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable. What role did he play in the birth, growth, or awakening of the temple beneath Terra? Was he its victim, swallowed by a trap older than history? Or its architect, the sculptor of sin who gave it voice and shape? The mystery gnaws at the soul because both possibilities are equally horrifying. And the deeper one digs, the more it becomes clear that the man who vanished was no longer the man he had once been. There is, of course, the narrative of innocence. That Ro, ever the diligent servant of the Imperium, stumbled upon something ancient and foul in his tireless pursuit of order. Perhaps it began with inconsistencies in subterranean records, discrepancies in void space usage beneath the Senatum, unauthorized material transfers, unexplained staff disappearances. A curious mind follows the data. A conscientious leader investigates what others ignore, and in the shadows beneath the palace, Ro found it. Or rather, it found him. The first theory paints him as a martyr. That he went in alone, or with a hand-picked team, and was overtaken mind, body, soul, by the seductive pulse of Slaanesh's song. Maybe he tried to resist, maybe he tried to seal it, destroy it, but in doing so he was claimed, not in death, but in transformation. What returned or remained was not Maverick Ro. It was a reflection of desire wrapped in his flesh, a shell humming with divine harmony. In this telling, Ro is the canary in the coal mine, silenced because his fate proved how deep the corruption ran. But that is not the only tale whispered. Others suggest he was always inclined toward the cult's theology. Not a deviant, not a traitor, but a man deeply unsatisfied with the Imperium's slow decay. A mind too brilliant, too sensitive, trapped in a system that crushed nuance and suppressed all joy. For someone like Ro, sensation may have become the only true act of rebellion. He might have sought out the temple deliberately, not as a seeker of pleasure, but of truth. In Slaanesh's philosophy, he found not just escape, but meaning. These believers call him the first voice, the one who gave the temple its breath, the one who didn't just enter the temple, but sang it into being. His words are said to be embedded in its walls, in echoes that only cult initiates can hear. To them, Ro was not lost. He was elevated, shed his mortal constraints, and became a living hymn. If this is true, then his disappearance was not an erasure, but an ascension. The perfect act of devotion. And yet, a third possibility haunts the darkest corners of speculation. What if Ro was neither victim nor founder, but vessel? A man chosen, not for his brilliance, not for his corruption, but for his emptiness. Slaanesh does not always favor the decadent. Sometimes it chooses the unfulfilled, the unloved, the perfectly hollowed. Ro may have been primed for possession from birth. His entire life, his rise, his silence, his influence, was preparation. The moment he walked into the temple was not a choice. It was a consummation. There are stories, unverifiable of course, that Ro had no childhood records. That his early career is marked by gaps too precise to be accidental. That the gene scans in his earliest administratum files contain anomalies flagged by forgotten algorithms. That his name, Mavrek, is a derivative of a pre-imperial dialect for mouth. In this theory, Ro was always an instrument, flesh made to carry sound, a man-shaped door through which the temple could breathe. Perhaps all three interpretations are true, in pieces. Perhaps Ro began as a loyal servant who became seduced by a darker philosophy and finally was overtaken by the very force he sought to understand. That, too, is a Slaaneshi irony. Transformation that devours origin, sensation that overrides memory. If he had regrets, we will never know them. If he left warnings, they have been buried or ignored. There are still those among the scribes of Terra who swear they see his shadow in dreams. Not as a man, but as a presence, tall, robed, featureless, standing before a gate made of mirrors. His voice, when he speaks, is a song. And what he says is always the same. I am what you wanted. Victim, architect, vessel. The temple does not care. It sings of Ro in all these roles. Because in the end, what mattered was not who he was, but what he became. A part of the breath beneath the palace. A name erased by ecstasy. A high lord who disappeared without a trace and was remembered only in whispers. Time may pass, but Terra never forgets. Not truly. Beneath its continent-spanning spires and continent-crushing bureaucracies, there are whispers that refuse to die. Some say the temple beneath the palace was destroyed, its halls salted with warp-nullifying wards, its worshippers slain to the last. Others insist it was never truly there to begin with, just a myth, a fabrication, a story told by rival high lords to sully the name of a vanished peer. But the truth does not rest easily, and in the silence that follows certainty, new echoes rise. In the dawn of the 42nd millennium, the Imperium faces its darkest hour. The Cicatrix Maledictum splits the galaxy in two, a screaming wound in the fabric of reality. Terra remains the heart of the Imperium, but it pulses with anxiety and fracture. And in the underhives, in the black-cowled cells of the Ministorum, in the sealed vaults of the Inquisition, a name begins to surface again. Mavrek Ro. Not as a man, not as a warning, but as a presence. Reports begin to trickle upward, stifled at first, then choked entirely. Sanitation crews disappearing near sealed strata, long believed abandoned. Vox units picking up non-local frequencies, soft harmonies laced with moans. A minor tech priest, while repairing a cogitator beneath the Administratum Basilica, reportedly found a hallway that wasn't there yesterday, lined with mirrored walls and singing dust. He tried to walk it? He's still missing. Then come the disappearances, always minor at first. Low-level scribes, archivists, sub-hive artisans. But their records don't just end, they're erased. Their names removed from rosters, their assignments reassigned without comment. When questioned, their colleagues respond with vacant stares or faint smiles. Some weep, unable to say why. The ecclesiarchy proclaims spiritual disturbance. The Ordo Hereticus investigates and vanishes. In one case, a sister dialogus receives a transcript from a psychic medium in the Schola Pergenium. It reads, "The mouth opens again. Beneath the throne it sings." She transcribes the rest. The Inquisition takes her, the words are sealed, but the melody lingers. And then the temple surfaces in the most impossible place, dreams. Not visions, not prophetic hallucinations, but dreams shared across individuals. Unconnected acolytes report the same sensation of velvet walls, of distant music, of being watched by something elegant. Psychers weep at the thought of it, unable to describe what they saw. Some become obsessed with mirror fragments. Some pluck out their own tongues. One kills himself by inhaling candle wax, whispering that he wanted to feel the pain just right. Whispers among the Adeptus Custodes, rare, blasphemous even, hint that some among them remember a war that was never logged. A corridor sealed in the palace that cannot be mapped. A section of the Hall of Echoes where one hears not the Emperor's silence but music, faint and intoxicating. Some deny it. Others simply walk away, expressionless. There's also talk, quiet, dangerous, of cult activity among nobles. Not of crude heresies, but of refined parties. Orchestras that play one note all night. Dinners with no food, only scent and sound. Rooms filled with pillows, silence, and expectation. When interrogated, the hosts plead ignorance, yet their eyes shimmer when they speak of the breath beneath the marble. The Inquisition is divided. Some believe the cult was never fully purged, and what remains is a flickering ember reigniting. Others believe the temple was never fully material, and thus never fully erased. It exists in a warp-touched fold of Terra's soul, accessible only when the conditions emotional, psych, spiritual align. And the galaxy, screaming and torn, is a choir in which that alignment is no longer rare. The cult may be small, a spark, a note, but in the hands of Slaanesh that is enough. Pleasure requires only one nerve, despair needs only one wound. And beauty, terrible beauty, can flower from the bloodiest soil. So when someone disappears on Terra today, when their name is struck, when no one speaks their name, ask not where they went, ask what they heard. Because the temple beneath the throne does not die, it sings, and the song is soft, sweet, irresistible. Some say Ro walks again, not as flesh but as a voice, a melody you hum without remembering where you heard it, a shadow that smiles in mirrored halls. And when the wind is right, and the silence deep enough, you might hear it too. The breath of a god, exhaling through stone, singing not of death, but of return. The legacy of the Slaaneshi temple beneath Terra does not echo only in physical disappearances or cultic resurgence. It lingers in the minds of those who have heard of it, even if they have never set foot near its hidden chambers. Like a shadow cast by a flame no one remembers lighting, it reaches beyond its origin, infecting dreams, philosophies, and even the sacred institutions that pride themselves on incorruptibility. The story of the temple is no longer just a tale of blasphemy buried in stone, it is a contagion of thought. Among the Scala Progenium, whispers of the Singing Hollow are passed in secret between orphans of executed traitors and fallen commissars. They speak of a test that never appears on any schedule. A door in the lower levels that only opens when you're alone and certain no one is watching. Those who claim to have seen it say the door is made of mother of pearl, always warm to the touch. They describe not horror behind it, but relief. The rumors say if you enter, you return perfect, or not at all. The Librarium Sanctus on Terra has reported an uptick in perceptual anomalies among its most reclusive lex mechanics. These aren't minor auditory hallucinations or routine insomnia. Entire blocks of scripture have been found subtly rewritten, not by hand, but by the machine spirits themselves. Litanies altered to shift emphasis from obedience to sensation. Prayers that ask not for the Emperor's strength, but for his voice, his breath. Attempts to trace these alterations through data logs always end the same way. Missing files, corrupted backups, and in one chilling case, a servitor whose mouth would not stop singing even after its vocal cords were removed. Perhaps most terrifying is the resurgence of a particular artistic style, one long suppressed by the ecclesiarchy after it was deemed corruptive to the soul. It features spiraling architecture, anatomy merged with sculpture, and subjects with blurred expressions that seem to shimmer at the edge of vision. A painting matching this description was discovered in the quarters of a high-ranking confessor who had hanged himself using rosary beads made from fused teeth. The image, never released to the public, reportedly evoked in viewers a simultaneous desire to weep, scream, and touch. There are those in the Inquisition, radicals, inevitably, who believe the temple was never truly heretical. That it represents a fracture in the soul of the Imperium, a wound that, if studied rather than sealed, might reveal the deeper laws of the warp. They argue that understanding pleasure is as vital as understanding pain. That the Emperor's own web of control is a form of spiritual repression, and what lies beneath Terra is not a threat, but a mirror. These Inquisitors operate alone, in cells that never last long. When they disappear, no one searches. Meanwhile, black ships have quietly altered their routes. Some now avoid the lower orbital paths directly above the palace's western substructures. The official reason is gravitational instability, but rogue astropaths, overheard in their sleep, speak of a thrum that resonates through their minds when passing over those coordinates. A pulse they describe as intimate, melancholy, yearning. More than one has asked, tearfully, to be let off ship mid-orbit. Even the Adeptus Custodes, paragons of silence and discipline, have shown signs of strain. Initiates assigned to the palace's deeper levels have been reassigned more frequently in the past decade than in the entire previous millennium. Unofficial accounts suggest that some custodians refuse to descend past a certain depth, citing psychic static or unquantifiable unease. A few have begun the ritual of purity prematurely. A cleansing rite typically reserved for those who believe they have been touched by the warp. It is not madness. It is fear they cannot explain. All of this suggests a truth more insidious than any open cult, that the temple has ceased to be a location and become an idea. It no longer needs walls or altars. It exists in longing glances, forgotten dreams, and melodies hummed without origin. It feeds not on sacrifice, but on curiosity, and the more the Imperium tries to forget it, the more it becomes unforgettable. Maverick Row is not remembered by name in most records, but his presence endures. In the questions no one dares ask. In the corridors no one dares clean. In the shadows beneath the golden throne where something once sang and may sing again. Because in the Imperium there are many kinds of silence. The silence of discipline, the silence of death. And then there is the silence after a song has ended, but before it begins again. Terra is sacred. That is what every citizen of the Imperium is taught. It is the throne world, the seat of the Emperor, the birthplace of humanity's great dream. Pilgrims crawl across 100 sectors for the chance to glimpse its poisoned sky. Billions starve in its shadow just to say they live upon its surface. But beneath all that reverence lies a truth more uncomfortable, more fragile. Terra is broken. Not in the way war breaks worlds, but in the way neglect and decay break meaning. It is a sacred corpse, mummified in gold, and at the heart of every corpse is rot. This is what makes Terra the perfect place for Slaanesh to reach into reality. The other Chaos gods feed on primal forces, war, decay, ambition. Slaanesh is more insidious. Slaanesh feeds on aspiration, on longing, on the denial of longing. And what world is more aspirational, more violently obsessed with its own sanctity than Terra? On Terra, a billion voices cry out each day for beauty, pleasure, meaning, and are told to suppress it. To find virtue in suffering, to serve without expectation of joy. The Cathedral of the Emperor's Light hosts daily sermons denouncing the body as a prison. The ecclesiarchy speaks of the soul as a tool to be honed against duty. But these words, shouted with such fervor, only inflame the hunger they seek to contain. Where repression is constant, desire does not die. It concentrates. It becomes toxic, potent, transformative. The psychic pressure of such longing, across centuries, across layers of bureaucracy, across the entire population, forms a spiritual echo in the warp. Terra is not just a planet, it is a wound. A million unfulfilled dreams drip into the immaterium every second, pooling into something hungry, and that hunger, in turn, whispers back. There is a theory, heretical and beautiful, that the temple beneath Terra did not require construction at all. That it manifested not by hand, but by consensus. A psychic cyst formed from millennia of sublimated desire coalescing into architecture. When enough souls dream the same hunger, the warp answers. When enough minds imagine a door to escape reality, the door appears. This aligns with the experiences of certain psychers who have survived contact with the temple. They describe the structure as responsive. That walls flex in accordance with breath. That corridors shift toward your emotional resonance. One claimed the temple mirrored his own longing so precisely that he ceased to know whether he was dreaming or remembering. He no longer knew if he had entered the temple or if he was the temple. The implications are terrifying. If the temple is a manifestation of collective human desire, then it cannot be truly destroyed, only displaced. And if the source of that desire is Terra itself, then it will return. Again, and again, and again. It may be that Maverick Rowe didn't build anything at all, that he simply found it, or worse, realized it into being. High Lords are not just bureaucrats, they are psychic nexuses of authority and will. A High Lord who yearned deeply enough, quietly enough, might shape the warp just by existing. If Rowe had within him a longing that no policy could fulfill, no decree could mute, then the temple would have called to him, not as a destination, but as a mirror. And what of the Emperor? He is not blind. His soul burns at the center of humanity's spiritual gravity. Could he not see this blasphemy beneath his own body? Perhaps he allowed it. Perhaps he did not care. Or perhaps more disturbingly, he understands. After all, the Emperor has never been a god of mercy. He does not offer comfort, only purpose. And if the temple absorbs those who cannot bear that purpose, then maybe it serves a function, like a drain beneath a cathedral. A necessary heresy. One must consider the idea that the temple is Terra's unconscious. That it holds not just lust but everything forbidden. Artistic freedom, sensuality, individual identity. The cry of a soul that wants to be more than a number in a billion-ledger system. It is not just a shrine to Slaanesh. It is the spiritual shadow of the Imperium. And like all shadows, it lengthens as the light above becomes harsher. This theory explains why it inspires madness. Not because it is alien, but because it is familiar. The temple is not strange, it is recognizable. The curve of a sculpture, the rhythm of breath, the harmony of voice and desire. These are not foreign horrors, they are our horrors. What we locked away, what we denied, what we feared to feel. And that is the true genius of Slaanesh. It does not create sin, it reveals it. It holds up a mirror and waits. And on Terra, the mirror has been cracked for 10,000 years. The temple may no longer exist in space, but it exists in minds, in ideas, in the warp. Every suppressed feeling adds another brick. Every denied ecstasy breathes life into its halls. And when the pressure builds again, as it surely will, it won't take a High Lord to open the gate. Just a dreamer, just a song, just a single heartbeat in sync with the pulse. And once more beneath the palace the stone will sigh, and the temple will bloom. And if you've heard this story, if you followed the breath and the shadow in the song, then you felt it too. That tug, that resonance, the pulse beneath the stone. You've already walked the first step toward the mirror, and perhaps when the moment comes, you'll remember what you read here. You'll close your eyes, you'll breathe in, and you'll understand. And if this story stirred something in you, curiosity, dread, fascination, then you've already heard the first note of the song. Subscribe to this channel for more forbidden histories, untold truths, and whispered horrors from the darkest corners of the 41st millennium. There's more beneath the surface. There always is.